in my early 20s. I can't quite remember exactly how old I was, but um, I came into Sikhi after I got back from two deployments overseas because I was enlisted in the Army in the US because I was born and raised in Southern California. I came into Sikhi after I got married. My wife is Punjabi. When I met her, she was a Christian. And as after we got married, we had to learn a lot more about each other's cultures. And part of that, of course, is learning about Sikhi. So I started studying it. My wife, she wasn't really as educated about Sikhi growing up. She didn't have good role models when she was a kid. And so that's why she left Sikhi. She ran away from home. She turned to Christianity. But like Guruji was in her heart, very much so. And so she just needed to actually learn about it and have some good role models. And then we both ended up coming back to it together after we got married. And it was because we got married that we got into Sikhi. A lot of times I get people coming up to my wife and then they'll say, "How did you do it? I've been trying to get my son or my husband or whomever to tie the star and come to the Gurdwara with me. I can't figure it out." And so my wife kind of laughs at it sometimes if this is like a hardened combat veteran who's been through so much in his life. Like, how am I going to force him to tie the star every day, right? Um, but we get a lot of mixed responses because of that. Because unfortunately, there's just not, at least in my experience, there's when I go to the Gurdwara, it's very rare that I see anyone who's not Punjabi in the Gurdwara, much less anyone who's uh, not Punjabi and Sikh in the Gurdwara. I just don't see it very often, unfortunately. But so yeah, we get a lot of questions, and that's why we started coming into Sikhi, is because we actually started learning about it together when we got married, so that we could actually address this issue later on when it came to us having kids. And now we finally have a daughter. She just turned 5 years old last week, and again, we're having to do the same thing of educating people around us and having difficult conversations about race and about identity and about what we call anti-blackness or anti-black racism in South Asian communities, but just in the Punjabi community here in Calgary, where I live now, in central Canada. So the first thing I guess we'll say is I don't know how savvy you guys are with a lot of these definitions that we tend to use when it comes to BLM or racial inequality or oppression or privilege or whatever it is. So I wanted to just very quickly talk to you guys about some of that. BLM or Black Lives Matter, if you guys don't know, it started in 2013. There was a young man, his name was Trayvon Martin, and he was killed, and the man who murdered him was acquitted. So he wasn't charged with a crime after that. And a lot of people were so outraged by this that's how Black Lives Matter started. They started looking into this unfair treatment of Black people, especially as it comes to police, but they really cemented themselves in the global community now around this idea of we need to combat white supremacy and we need to intervene wherever we can when it comes to violence, especially against Black people, but against all people of color. So around the world, that's really what the movement is doing now. When we talk about racial inequality, we're saying that there is inequality, meaning some people get much better treatment, some people are treated much worse, and all those differences and how we're treated is it's predicated on skin color or ethnicity. And so this is a result of historic oppression and privilege and prejudice that's not new. It's been here for forever, especially in America. It's not a new story in America. But one thing that's really important that I think a lot of people don't quite realize is that Black people are treated differently from everybody else, right? And a lot of the racism that Blacks face is almost specific to Black people. And today, more and more, you kind of get the people of color euphemism kind of gets pushed on all of us of BLM is about all people of color. But we really don't see that Black people really get the worst treatment, along the way. And so, like, when sometimes people ask me about like being treated like because I'm a religious minority, because I'm a visible minority, because I'm an immigrant, because like I have so many different factors that go up against me, where a lot of people face prejudice because of all of those exact same things. But the kind of treatment that I face because I'm Black is different. So how's it different? Um, on one hand, there's this like stereotypes. The stereotypes are very different for Black people than they are for like someone else who I know would be like, a random person in Sangat that's Punjabi, also has a beard, also has a dastar, also carries a kirpan, but I'm Black and he's not. And we go to the same place together and I get treated very differently, right? And that can I'll talk about different forms of that in a second. But when it comes to stereotypes, I find that Black people are treated a lot more negatively. And a lot of the stereotypes, a lot of the assumptions that come when you look at someone who's Black, it's very specific to them being Black, or you think, oh, this person is dangerous, or this person is inherently poor, or this person is inherently uneducated, or whatever it is. And we tend to get taught a lot of these assumptions, even just as kids. Even if a lot of people in our family aren't saying it directly to us, of like, you need to be suspicious of Black people or don't trust them or whatever it is. They might not be saying that to us, but with how they treat us, it becomes apparent, and we pick up on all those things as a kid. And so what are different forms of historic oppression? Well, firstly, discrimination, it comes in different forms. One form of discrimination is structural discrimination. So that basically means that like at any institution, they have policies in place that reinforce discrimination. So for example, like in the political system, like for a long time in America, it was Black people aren't people. And then it's okay, Black people are 3/5 of a person. And okay, slavery is illegal unless they're prisoners. And then it's legal to have slaves. Or anti-Black laws in America, like Jim Crow, where they say have like the paper bag rule. You go to a building, if your skin's darker than a paper bag, then you have to use the colored entrance in the back of the building, right? Things like that. So that's like structural oppression. And then another kind is individual oppression. So individual oppression is a lot of assumptions that we make about people because of stereotypes, etc. And then the other thing is
Good for day, guys. You guys should have a teacher here momentarily. We're looking for them. Don't know where they are. Okay? So stay put. Okay?
Okay. Okay, all the kids, you need to change your breakout room to 2-3 main.
Jesse. So everywhere I go, people are asking me like, why don't you go by the name Jesse, right? Why don't you, like, Tegh is too hard of a word to say. You should go by Jesse. Or, like, if they look at how I dress because I love to wear bana. Or why do you wear the star every day? Or, with the food that I eat, right? Why are you predominantly vegetarian or whatever it is? They look at those things like they're bad. And I'm saying they're not bad, they're beautiful. And just because they're different doesn't mean that they're worthy of your criticism. So that's like cultural imperialism. And then with individual racism, there's also a lot of hostility that goes towards people of different groups just because they're part of that group. And that can take a number of different forms, but it really boils down to, you see somebody you identify them as unlike you, and then you treat them unfairly, you harass them, you make jokes about them, you don't want anything to do with them, like you won't be friends with them or anything like that. And then we have violent discrimination, which is like physical abuse in all of its different forms because somebody is a certain skin color, because you categorize them as being other. And then the last thing, which is really subtle, is something called smiling discrimination. So smiling discrimination is something that's really almost impossible to prosecute. And that's when somebody makes an assumption about you based on your skin color. And then they're going to treat you unfairly, but they're going to do it in such an underhanded way that it's really ambiguous of whether they're picking on you or not picking on you, or are they a racist or are they not a racist. So for like me, as being Black, like when I was in India, or even like in the early days of me going to the Gurdwara, I'd see like a lot of people just following me around and staring at me. Like I would go to a grocery store, Indian grocery store, and there would be the same person every single aisle, just like stopping and staring at me every single where that I went. Right? They're not doing anything wrong, right? They're not, harassing me or anything like that. But like I come to find out, and like you go and talk to these people, or sometimes it's security guards, and they're like really angry looking at me, and then they think I'm going to steal something, so they're following me around, right? And even in my everyday life, when I go out to stores, like especially when I was living in the States in California, young Black man goes to the grocery store, right? Somebody would come up to me, or like not come up to me in the store, but like just staring at me to make sure that I'm not going to steal anything. And I'm like, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just like anybody else. You might find this like you're crossing the border. Well, not so much now because the borders are closed, but like before, it's like you go through customs, and like white people, someone who like just fits this stereotypical ideal of there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a criminal. You know, mom and dad with young kids, and I'm not going to investigate you at all. But then you see somebody with dreadlocks, or you see somebody with an accent, or you see somebody who's in cultural dress, and then you harass that person of like, where are you going? Where are you coming from? What's in your bags? Like unnecessarily. It doesn't look like you're breaking the law. You're probably not breaking the law. You're operating within the confines of what's acceptable, but you're putting a lot of unnecessary pressure on that person because of their cultural identity, of some kind of label that you've given them. So that's smiling discrimination. And like I said, we learned a lot of this from a really young age, and then we just kind of reinforce it. And I find that the older I get, the more we have to like have these conversations where we're breaking down barriers, talking to each other to say, hey, what was it like for you growing up as a kid? And what kind of food did you eat? Oh, that's just like the food that I eat. And, how are our communities similar? And like 10 times out of 10, I always find that people from different cultural backgrounds are way more similar than we realize. A lot of people ask me of like coming into Sikhi of how is that appealing to you when as a kid you grew up as a Christian, right? Were you a Christian and now you're a Sikh? Do you ever worry that you're going to go back to Christianity one day? And like they have like it's kind of hard to reconcile the two things, right? But I'm in my experience, I'm like, you don't understand how similar it all is, and like you never know like what really draws people towards one path or another. But I come to love Sikhi very, very much. In order to deal like this issue of how do we handle racism and inequality and stuff, like we really gotta like have these conversations with people. We gotta like be cultural ambassadors and get out there. Like you see somebody come to a Gurdwara or just like in your school or whatever it is, and they look different. Like just be a friend to that person. Just be kind. It's like it's not really rocket science, right? And like the other thing though is like it's easy to not say anything when you see somebody else being mistreated. And that's like on one hand, that goes both ways. You don't say anything to the person who's being mean, and you don't say anything to the person who's being bullied. And like everybody loses because of that, right? So it's like that's a hard one to kind of get used to the more you see it, especially like if it's your friends or somebody in your family and they have a lot of negative things to say about somebody from a different culture, somebody of a certain skin color. But like for me, like coming into the Gurdwara, early experiences, I had this a lot where I go to talk to somebody and then they would just look at me and then they'd immediately look away and walk away, just wouldn't even engage me at all. I had a lot of people who would be criticizing me in the Gurdwara because my wife is Punjabi and they're making fun of us because of that, because I don't speak a ton of Punjabi. I understand quite a lot, but I just don't speak it all the time. And especially like when I'm in the Gurdwara, like I'll have conversations in Punjabi with my wife at the Gurdwara. But that's really about it. For the most part, I try to talk in English because I feel like my Punjabi is just not very good when I'm speaking it. But a lot of people will give me a hard time because I don't speak that much Punjabi. And a lot of people will like give me this argument of like, Punjabi is Guru Gobind Singh Ji's language, and you should speak that language too. It's our language. And I'm thinking, my immediate thought is, have you read Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Bani? Like, very little of it is in Punjabi, right? He spoke 5 languages, right? It's not about like the Punjabi language being superior, me being singled out because I'm Black, because I've never heard this argument with anyone else who's Punjabi, who just doesn't speak very much Punjabi. And I know a lot of Punjabis who don't speak very much Punjabi, and they don't get that kind of treatment. And so, like, not being a bystander, when you see people being treated unfairly, it goes both ways. Sometimes when it's hard to call people out, I'd say don't call them out, like call them in. And I think it's really important, like when we're dealing with this problem of like, how do we treat people from different communities or within our own community? Like the big thing is just listen to them, just hear them out, right? Just someone says something really offensive or, upsetting, right? Don't attack that person right away. Like ask them, like, where did you hear this from? Like, why do you think that's okay? And if you just give them the opportunity to talk, eventually, like, they'll start to come around and like they'll be able to hear themselves reason through it, and that it's just totally illogical. And you don't necessarily all the time have to like argue with people about it if like, you're a racist or whatever, which is something else that I really, really disagree with. I do not at all believe in this idea of people being racist. It doesn't help you to identify people as racist, and it doesn't help that person to constantly be called a racist, right? Racism is an action. It's not an identity, right? Racism is an action. It's something that we do. So like, don't call people racist, right? Actions are racist. You could say what you said was racist, right? How you're treating that person is racist. But are people racist? Absolutely not. I don't believe in that, right? People can change, and we need to give people the opportunity to change, right? Because how is that person ever going to get away from that if they're constantly being told you're racist, you're racist, you're racist? They're going to start to lean into it harder, right? And there's a lot of research that goes into this idea of biased assimilation and everything, but like, we got to give that people a space to change. Most of the time, somebody's been hurt, or they've just been fed a lot of propaganda by people that they trust. And so they just tend to adopt a lot of these things and don't put as much thought into them as they need to, right? But like, for me, just I've seen this a lot, like with my wife's family, just being the best person that I can be. Like, very gradually, I start to undo a lot of their old assumptions or their old ideas about like how Black people are, right? So it's like, you don't really have to do anything special. Just don't be a bystander. If you're not going to tell that person, hey, that was racist or that's not fair, then be a friend to that person who's being attacked at least, right? And that's something that I do sincerely wish that I had early on of me coming into the Gurdwara. And like, a lot of you guys ask, like, how was I treated in a Gurdwara? How do people receive me? And it's a bit of a mixed, like, I get different responses. On one hand, like, I've met a lot of this, like, people think I don't belong there. A lot of people think like I'm not a real Sikh, or like I'm just like putting on a show basically because I'm dressing up nice to come to a Gurdwara for whatever reason. A lot of people think like I'm not a good enough Sikh because I don't speak Punjabi, or like in the beginning I wasn't tying of the star, it took a long time for my case to grow in. Like, I didn't start keeping my case until 2014. So people like see like with a bald head and a ramal and clean shaven, just wearing a kurta, they're thinking like, this doesn't add up. Why are you here? A lot of people like were like trying really hard to stay away from me, not talking to me, not talking to my wife, not inviting us to anything, even like trying to find out about programs or classes going on at the Gurdwara. Like, I wanted to, go to Punjabi school or whatever it was. And, a lot of people just like wouldn't answer those questions, wouldn't give me the opportunity to even join those classes sometimes. And then on the flip side of that, sometimes people have like looked at me and saying like, you're like the token Black guy and I want to be your friend so I can show people that, I'm not racist. And, like, eventually you sort of see that it's an act and they don't really care about you as much as they say. But like, aside from that, sometimes people look at me and they're just like, their heart is just overflowing with Panthic pride of like, this is how great Sikhi is, somebody from outside the community who's Black in the face of all this racism and, you know, what's going on in the world today, thinks Sikhi so amazing because it is, you know. And so it's like, yeah, like the responses that I get are very, very mixed. But for the most part, coming into Sikhi early on, I faced a lot of criticism. So ending, I guess, like, just to wrap it up now of like, yeah, just to wrap it up, like handling a lot of that, how did I deal with it? And then this will be like my last talking point is handling that negativity. Like, first of all, just, I treat it the same way. I treat the same way as a praise. Somebody says something mean to me, I just bless that person and release. Just don't hold on to it. It's like, it's not for me, it's for them. And the second thing is, like, I have people that I can talk to so I can let it go, right? It's like, even if it does bother me, like, I'm still trying to do my Simran. I'm focusing on the things that are important, and I just let it go, right? I'm able to talk it out, and then I have my own outlets for how I relieve stress, and I try to find a way to let it go, but I don't take it personally, right? It's a cultural problem. It's not an individual problem. But yeah, okay. It's 9:31, and I think
Well,
we
that's
have
where you
to
live.
transition.
It's 9:31.
Oh, sorry, 11:31.
Tegh Singh, for you guys who didn't get the fact that he's on the west coast of Canada, is 3 hours behind us. So he woke up early and really kind of got his stuff together, and just so that he could be here for you guys on time. So, and I want to really thank him for making the time to talk to our kids.